Chapter 92, 5th Year, Closing. Monday, 15th June, 1976. Remus was gone for 2 days. James went to the hospital wing on Sunday to tell him what had happened. Sirius was too much of a coward to say it himself, and besides, he was pretty sure that he'd be the last person Moony wanted to see once he found out. When James returned, Sirius hesitated before asking, Is he okay? James shrugged, sighing as he sat down on his bed. About as well as can be expected. He's got Pomfrey looking after him, don't worry. But Sirius did worry. He couldn't do anything but worry. He worried about how Remus had looked after full moons back when he'd spent them alone, fresh scars and new bruises. He worried about what Remus would do when he returned, what he might say. He worried about how Remus would look at him. "You'll deserve it," he reminded himself. "Whatever he says, whatever he does, you'll take it and you'll deserve it." Monday dragged by, torturously slow. It felt unreal that life should continue on as normal at Hogwarts, their peers blissfully unaware of what Sirius had done, what he had almost caused. Mary hugged his arm and smiled like he hadn't nearly killed 2 people, staring up in confusion when he mumbled excuses and pushed her away. By the time evening rolled around and Remus still hadn't returned, Sirius began to relax just the tiniest bit, thinking that at least he'd have one more night before he had to force himself to look Moony in the face with the knowledge of what he'd done like spilled blood between them. But it wasn't to be. The door slammed open just as they were about to go to bed, and Remus swept inside. He didn't look at them, just walked straight to his bed and picked up his pajamas, then immediately shut himself inside the bathroom. Sirius sat up straight, hardly blinking as he stared at the door. His heart was writhing in his chest. When Remus came out, he forced himself to speak. "Moony, But Remus didn't even look at him, just turned deliberately towards James and said, "Thank you for stopping Severus, James," in a flat, dead voice. "You saved both our lives." The other boy stammered, caught off guard, but Remus didn't wait for an answer. He crawled onto his bed, shutting the curtains and leaving only a heavy silence behind. Sirius felt as if he'd stepped into a tomb. Tuesday, 30th June, 1976. Sirius had expected anger. He had expected rage, wrath, vitriol. He had expected shouting or cursing. He'd even expected Remus to throw a punch. He had not expected silence. For the remaining 2 weeks at school, Moony wouldn't even look at him. He apologized every chance he got, in every way he knew. He whispered it between classes, he murmured it at meals, he said it each night before bed, like a promise. He apologized until he was sick with it, until the words were carved into his tongue, until they crowded his chest so he couldn't breathe. He apologized in French, in Latin, in Italian. He made up new languages and apologized in those. He repeated the words silently to himself, like a mantra, like a spell. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." It didn't matter. Remus turned away from him every time. It was like begging with a stone. Mary noticed that something was wrong, of course. He almost broke down one day when she leaned her head against his shoulder and said gently, "Have you and Remus had a fight?" Sirius's throat closed up, thick with tears that always seemed to be stuck halfway between his eyes and his chest those days. Mary sighed. "Thought as much. Lily said he's been, and I quote, 'surely.' What happened?" Sirius shook his head. He tried to swallow. "I hurt him. Really, really badly. It's all my fault." His voice broke and Mary wrapped her arms around his waist. "Oh, Sirius," she said quietly, "I'm sure he'll forgive you. Just give him some time." It was what James said too. He seemed to think with enough space and time it was inevitable that Ramus would come around, but that was just because James Potter couldn't imagine a world in which you wouldn't forgive your friends. He himself had been quick to absolution, of course. James was a man of many talents, but holding grudges was not one of them. "You didn't mean for anyone to get hurt," he insisted benevolently. "You just weren't thinking." But Sirius knew that wasn't true. He had meant for someone to get hurt. James just couldn't let himself see that. His sense of justice, of right and wrong, was one of Potter's greatest strengths. It was also one of his most dangerous flaws. Sirius knew that to James he was a good person, and good people did not intentionally send other people to be slaughtered or maimed. Good people did not have dark enough hearts for such deep-rooted hatred. Sirius could not bring himself to rid his friend of this illusion. Even though he knew it was untrue, and it sent guilt pulsing like a fever through his blood, he was too terrified of what might happen if James ever truly understood the darkness in his heart. Sirius needed James. As long as he had his best friend, everything would be okay. The thought of giving him any reason to turn his back and leave was impossible. It would be like trying to live without lungs or a stomach, depriving the body of an essential part that was needed to function. So he didn't correct the misconceptions underlying James's forgiveness. Instead, Sirius promised himself that he would do better, be better. He'd become the person James thought he was. He would cut away the rotted bits of his soul like necrotic flesh until he was worthy of the kindness that he clung to like a parasite. But Ramus was different. Ramus saw straight through him, down to the core. There was no hiding from those piercing eyes, from the light that danced like embers inside them. Sirius knew that Ramus carried none of the same idealistic fantasies as James. He knew exactly what Sirius had done. He knew exactly why Sirius had done it, and he knew exactly what had been meant. It was why Sirius could do nothing, absolutely nothing, except apologize until his tongue bled. Because he knew he deserved the anger. They both knew. And James and Mary might be sure that he would eventually come around, but that was wishful thinking. Ramus would only forgive him if he deserved it, and Sirius knew, deep down, that he didn't. But that didn't make it any less painful. It was made worse by the fact that Ramus started avoiding them. He stopped going to classes, he skipped meals, he began spending more and more time down at the greenhouses according to a few Hufflepuffs that Mary was friends with. He came to bed late and woke up early and always, always left without saying a word. It made Sirius want to scream. James had gotten Snape out in time, Dumbledore had said everything was fine, but still, here he was, watching the life slowly drain out of his friend and knowing the whole time that it was entirely his fault, that there was absolutely nothing he could do to fix it. He wished Ramus would just punch him. He wished he would yell or scream or shout, that he would just say out loud that Sirius was despicable and selfish and unredeemable. He wished Ramus would cast a curse or a jinx or a hex. "I'd break bones for you," he thought feverishly on the bad nights. "I'd pull out teeth, open veins, I'd gut myself to make you forgive me." In the morning, he would wake up and whisper, "I'm sorry," as he watched Ramus walk out the door. Sirius knew he would have to be patient. He knew that if he had any chance at forgiveness, it would only come after he proved himself, that for Moony it would take something more than words. "I'll do it," he thought. "I'll change. I'll become a better person. I'll be someone he can trust again." He clung to this goal, feeling sometimes as though it were the only thing keeping his head above the dark water of his mind that tried more and more to drown itself. Even in his dreams, he begged. There was no relief. He crawled on hands and knees to Remus like a supplicant at an altar. He cried and pleaded and tore out his hair. He clung with shaking hands. He stared into the fiery pits of his eyes, burning with rage, until his skin caught fire and he screamed incandescent. But at least in the dreams Remus looked at him. At least in the dreams he touched him, fingers bruising and brutal and angry. At least in the dreams he spoke, vengeful and spitting. "I hate you! I hate you! I hate you! I hate you!" murmured as Remus's lips brushed his neck. "I hate you," whispered as his fingers skimmed over Sirius's chest. "I hate you," groaned into Sirius's shoulder as their bodies tangled together. "I hate you, and I will never stop hating you." When Sirius woke, it was shaking and desperate with want. The dreams would melt away, leaving only shame behind, and he would press his fingers into his eyes, hating himself more than ever.